Hello and welcome to Making Media Now, the Filmmakers Collaborative podcast. I'm your host, Michael Azevedo. My guest on this episode is Clay Tweel, director of a powerful new documentary called The Bitter Pill. Clay's film, which debuted on PBS on September 22nd and will be available to stream on PBS Digital until December 10th, follows the charismatic West Virginian plaintiff attorney Paul Farrell Jr. as he wages a legal war against some of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies in a landmark battle fueled by personal stakes. A powerful chronicle of justice, accountability, and resilience, The Bitter Pill is set in Farrell's hometown in West Virginia, a community at the epicenter of America's opioid epidemic, where 20% of babies are born addicted to opioids. Farrell is determined to recover damages, bring justice to his neighbors, and rebuild a community ravaged by corporate greed. As his groundbreaking legal strategy gains national attention, the case escalates into the largest civil litigation in U.S. history. Through courtroom drama and behind-the-scenes access, Clay's Bitter Pill captures the human cost and high stakes of a community's battle against systemic failure. Here's the trailer.
Right down here, this was government housing, and I went to school with these kids. And when we had that 24 people overdose in 3 hours, it was sold from right there on that corner to people. And within 3 hours, 24 people overdosed.
Until you've picked up one of your own and put them in a potty bag. You know, how do you put a number on that? Somebody has to freaking pay for this.
This wasn't an accident that happened. This was part of a complex business plan to sell as much opium in America as possible. So I filed a lawsuit against the distributors, and it was the first of its kind. With this case, I'm representing my entire home community. Now I'm suddenly feeling like I can make a big difference.
He's gone from, a very good lawyer in West Virginia to now a national very good lawyer. That's a big jump.
Do you believe that the actions that you or your company took contributed to the opioid epidemic? Yes or no? And if it's
No.
not either one?
No, sir, I do not believe that we contributed to the opioid crisis.
What the defendants have done in this case is they have marked everything confidential because they don't want the country to see what they did and what they knew they were doing.
I'm going to expose to the entire country exactly what's happened for the past 20 years. If my legal theory is right, I'm going to introduce them to the misery they caused.
Making Media Now is sponsored by Filmmakers Collaborative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting media makers from across the creative spectrum. From providing fiscal sponsorship to presenting an array of informative and educational programs, Filmmakers Collaborative supports creatives at every step in their journey. To learn more, visit filmmakerscollab.org. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please do give it a like, a share, a follow. Now on to my conversation with Clay Tweel. Clay Tweel, welcome to Making Media Now.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's good to be speaking with you about The Bitter Pill. So The Bitter Pill tells the story of Paul Farrell Jr., an attorney from Cabell County, West Virginia, and his deployment of what you refer to as an innovative legal strategy to sort of force corporate responsibility for the opioid epidemic that's ravaging his state and much of the nation at the time. How did you find out about his crusade, and what was it about the story that you thought, this isn't just another story about pharmaceutical companies taking advantage of people looking for pain meds?
Sure. Well, this story is very personal to me in that both sides of my family, both my mom and dad, are from Huntington and Cabell County in West Virginia. And so my uncle was actually law partners with Paul Farrell. And that's how I heard about the story. Is my uncle and I were having dinner. This was back in 2016, and we had both just read the book Dreamland, and by Sam Quinones, and we were talking about it. And he's like, my law partner is thinking about filing these cases and taking on the opioid distributors, which not a lot of people know about and really focus on, but they're really like the regulatory body of this whole distribution chain. And I that piqued my interest. He's like, why don't you just call him? I'll give you his number and see what you think. And I called Paul and, could instantly tell that he was he was a good storyteller in and of himself. He was incredibly charming. He was incredibly good at consolidating very complex ideas into simple sound bites and that were compelling, which I think a lot of good lawyers are good at that. They're good storytellers and do that very well. So I was like, okay, this guy's a really good character. And as he explained the foundations of his case, I thought it had a lot of merit. And I thought that, our in that first conversation, we talked about sort of what's the grand plan here of if this all goes well for both of us, what does that look like? And I think we both arrived at this idea of bringing transparency and accountability to this situation, which was ravaging the nation. It still is, but was even worse then. And so I felt like it was also spoke to me as a documentarian in a way that I always look for really strong characters to tell their story. And I knew that from the sounds of it, this lawsuit was going to take a pretty big toll on Paul and was going to be something that was a Herculean effort and would be like there's a built-in David versus Goliath framing to it.
Yes.
I like to be able to tell character-based stories that somehow backdoor and Trojan horse social issues into them rather than vice versa. So that's what I was trying to do. And that's why it spoke to me on many levels, but that's sort of the rundown.
And Paul is a plaintiff's attorney. How did this case compare to the types of cases he had historically taken on in terms of the scale and the scope of it?
I mean, it immediately dwarfed the scale of anything else that he had worked on. He had worked on one other sort of class action suit that there was an MDL for this transvaginal mesh set of lawsuits that were several years before this. And so I think he got a little bit of a taste of what it's like to have a set of his cases be rolled up into a bigger case that goes to a state or in some cases a national level. And he I don't want to speak too much for him, but I think that was a growing experience for him. But then he saw with these opioid cases and with the distributors that it was just such a clear case of not doing the duty that is assigned to them, that in his mind, and that it gave great legal grounds for being able to take this case. And it quickly blew up. I mean, we started filming in March 2017, and within the first 6 months, he had signed up something like 200 other counties around the country.
Explain for listeners what that means. He had signed up. So he files this lawsuit, and attorneys in other counties can say, hey, I heard about this lawsuit. Can we join? Is that essentially how it works?
So, yeah, I will back up. I'm sorry. It's a lot of legalese. I feel like I've gone to law school having to make this movie.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah. So Paul brought these cases on behalf of cities and counties. He's quoted to me many times the statement that local problems require local solutions. And so he was like, I want this money to be to win some money from these companies and have it go to the counties themselves and have the counties try to solve this problem and get money for rehab beds and centers and Narcan and all the things that can help, but not have to share it or give it at a federal level, which it could get watered down.
Mm-hmm.
So he went directly to the county commissions of counties across America and was sort of presenting to them this idea of, filing these cases and having the money flow directly to them, rather than going to a state level. And so, other plaintiffs' attorneys started hearing about the cases that Paul was filing based on this public nuisance claim, and it was totally unique. It really hadn't been tried before. And so, public nuisance is a law that's been around since like the 1200s. It's like common law. It basically says if you cause some harm to the community, you have to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And, the other lawyers around the country started to see the merits of this case too, and immediately joined forces with Paul. We're either joining with him or we're filing on their own behalf.
Mm-hmm.
It really just caught fire, and all of a sudden, within a year, there was 1,000 cases all across America. I think there's only 3,000 counties in America, and like a third of them signed up in a year.
Wow. Yeah, it's a fascinating sequence in your film where you have this assembly of this, it's almost like this Justice League of America team of attorneys. And let's just talk about the target of the work that these attorneys are doing. So they're not going after the pharmaceutical companies, and they're not going after doctors who are prescribing these opioids. Who are they going after, and why?
So they're going after what are the opioid distributors, and distributors are the middleman between the people who make the pills, which are the Purdue Pharmas of the world. They make the pills, and then there's the CVS and Rite Aids, or the pharmacies that distribute those to the patient. A doctor writes a prescription, the pharmacies fill that prescription and give it to the patient. But there's a middleman, and these are these companies which are essentially a shorthand way to think about them is almost as if they're like Amazon. They're like a fulfillment center, and they take the pills from the manufacturers and they deliver them literally in trucks oftentimes in trucks to the pharmacies. But they are tasked by our government through what is the 1970 Controlled Substances Act to regulate this industry, because opium is the most addictive substance on earth. And so it is something that is highly abusable and is can cause great public harm. There's been it has tanked empires. There's been wars over it. Like, opium is a very volatile thing, and so it was in the best interest of the public good in 1970 to say, let's put a stopgap on this capitalism of these manufacturers could just try to sell as many of these really addictive pills to pharmacies and just ship, and it would be a very bad thing. So let's put a middleman in there to regulate this industry.
So ideally, the middleman is going to be in a position of saying that, hey, here we are in this particular town or this particular county, and we're noticing, in fact, we've got actual numbers here. There's an example of it's a town of 1,700, and is it over the course of a year that 250,000 opioid pills move through that town? And
theoretically, that one pharmacy.
Okay. So these distributors are legally bound to be alerting authorities, to any time the numbers really start to skew. And that was not happening.
Correct. That is, I think that the language is something like, I'm blanking on the exact statute language at the moment, but it's to find these anomalies that are unusual size or quantity or regularity, and to flag those and to stop the orders and do their due diligence of seeing, like, is this legit or not, and is this request for these pills legit or not, and if so, then you can ship it. But what was happening oftentimes was that these manufacturers were, these distributors were fulfilling the order before they did their investigation to see if these red flagged orders were okay or not.
And during this period of time, it seems, at least from your film, that the distributors are well aware of the addictive nature of the opioids that they're selling. In fact, you have, I believe it's emails between pharmaceutical reps and the distributors who they're joking about it. And in one chilling instance, somebody had floated the idea, I don't think it ever came to pass, hopefully, of a version of oxycodone for kids.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. There's a lot of people at these companies made a lot of money. And I think that, to me, that's a lot of what, if you boil it down, what the problem here is like profits over public health. And there's many people along this distribution chain, anybody from doctors to pharmacies to distributors to the people who are making the pills, the Sacklers and Purdue Farmers of the world. Everybody saw this as a huge money-making opportunity and cashed in on it rather than protecting the public from this very dangerous substance.
And that nature of the public, over the last decade or so, I think it's really easy to become numb to it. Hillbilly heroin, we used to hear, quite frequently. But, refresh our memory, if you would. What made this type of problem so destructive to communities such as Cabell County in West Virginia? And also, why were seemingly impoverished counties and towns and states the bigger target for a lot of the marketers of these highly addictive drugs?
Well, one of my favorite scenes that we filmed in the movie is with a neuroscientist named Dr. Corey Waller, and I think he's located in Minnesota. And he was giving a lesson essentially about what opium does to the brain and the sort of speaking directly to the factors that you're talking about of why certain communities have a higher proclivity towards addiction and towards these problems of overdoses. So Dr. Corey Waller has, interviews and, talks online. I highly recommend going and seeking that out, going down that rabbit hole a little bit, because he can explain it much better than I can. But I do think that these companies targeted communities that had both manual labor jobs and because people had a higher instance of sort of like bumps and bruises, and like communities that had more elderly communities, elderly people in them, again, because it is the need for pain medicine is higher. And so especially in West Virginia and along Appalachia, you have like a lot of industry and manual labor industry has left that part of the world. And so people have these lingering, if they're not currently working in manual labor, blue collar jobs, they have lingering injuries from when they used to.
Yep.
And I think that there is I think pretty strong evidence to suggest that they targeted these particular communities and pushed more sales reps to go into these doctors and convince them to prescribe more of these pills in order to bump their sales up and make more money.
Yeah, and either coincidentally or conveniently, these also tend to be populations that, if they found themselves in a position where, that people were personally addicted and had their lives ruined, and by extension, the lives of their fellow citizens ruined and their community ruined, because of their socioeconomic status, they probably had less leverage over, hiring lawyers and coming after giant pharmaceutical behemoths.
Sure. I mean, maybe that was in the background of some of the decision making here, but yeah, I mean, I do think that because these communities were so like hit so hard and were so blindsided by this, that I feel like it really will take a generation or so to try to come out of it. You know, like this is the ripple effect and the domino effect of addiction and of what opioid addiction does to families and to losing parents and to losing children. Like this, it's a hard fact to face that it's just going to take a while.
Yeah, and what it does to families is vividly illustrated in a really touching segment of your film, where one of the women who's on Paul's team, her name is escaping me at the moment.
Amy Kazan in Florida.
Amy, okay, yeah. She's a foster parent. And she's a foster parent to just a beautiful little boy who had to be removed from his mother's house because his mom was an addict.
Yeah. I mean, there's the foster care system in some of the harder hit places, like in Appalachia, like in Florida, even some along the northeastern coast too. It's just the foster care system is overwhelmed. There's not enough families to take in these kids who've lost their parents or or grandparents. So it's really caused a lot of social services and cost of things, like the ripple effect of like the cost of this crisis is so big, it's really hard to quantify. There was a guy who was the drug czar, I think, for Biden at one point, came in and said that the cost of the opioid crisis in West Virginia alone for like a small window of time was like $8 billion a year.
Yeah.
So it's really, it just affects so many systems of our society.
So you had mentioned that you began shooting, I think you said around March of 2017, right. And I would imagine that when you sign on to say, okay, we're going to make a documentary about this story, there was so much that was unknown. I mean, the legal system itself moves so slowly. You had no way of anticipating what type of momentum or setbacks, would take place. And then you're 3 years down the road in this little thing called a worldwide pandemic hits, which takes a glacially slow system and just brings it to a halt. So what kind of plates were you continually spinning as a storyteller and as a filmmaker when you were trying to anticipate the various ways this story might go?
I mean, it was a wild roller coaster. I'm not going to lie, Michael. It was so hard because I don't think I'll ever make a movie about a active court case ever again. It was just so hard. We thought early on that it would take a couple years. There was actually another case that was the first bellwether trial, which is what they use as sort of like the test cases that kind of are potential to go to trial first before, if you have a class action or an MDL, as they're called, and there's 3,000 cases in it, they take a couple and they're like, let's try these first and see what's going to happen. There was a bellwether in Cleveland that was in end of 2019, and we thought that was going to force all of these cases to settle. And so I really thought like, oh, this movie is going to take a couple years to finish, and that's about standard. Like if you're making a documentary, someone told me earlier in my career, if you commit to make any documentary, you have to think that it's going to take 2 to 3 years. And you're going to just have to be okay thinking and talking about it for that long. It's like, don't sign on to anything you're not willing to think and talk about for that amount of time. But that case settled in a very bizarre way. It only settled its one case, but it left all the other cases unsettled. And also all the settlement talks were giving West Virginia and Paul's home county next to nothing.
Yeah.
So to follow that all the way through took 6 years.
Yeah. And in that period of 6 years, at the beginning, like you said, you had this conversation with Paul, and he kind of brought you up to speed on what his idea was. But obviously things took place that he didn't anticipate, that you didn't anticipate. Were there periods along that 6-year journey where you were feeling like you had to keep, not necessarily, I'm sure Paul was driven internally, to keep fighting the fight from a legal standpoint, but did he always want to be the subject of a documentary?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm very grateful for Paul for, being as vulnerable and allowing us access to behind the scenes as much as he did, but also like, and rightly so, these lawyers are very, they were just like, what are you doing? Why are you in these rooms? Paul himself was just like, having very intense conversations. There's a lot riding on his shoulders and on a lot of the decisions that he's making. And so for us to like be following him and then be like, hey, can we come back? You've worked for 14 hours straight. Can we come back home with you and watch you like eat dinner and talk to your family? And he's like, get out of here. Yeah. What are you doing?
There is this one scene where he goes into his office on a weekend and his secretary is there. And he says to her, what are you doing here on a Saturday? And then he just kind of, gives a look behind his shoulder and says, yeah, this guy's following me still.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to have it be as experiential as possible. I love verite filmmaking. I love being able to, do the quote unquote fly on the wall thing. And try to just like let the audience see behind the curtain a little bit to like, what does it mean to try to really be a part of these lawsuits, to enact change in this way, go through the legal process in the way that this unfolds. It's pretty unique. Yeah. And so, like Paul did his best, but also like he needed time to recharge often. So that's the dance that you constantly have to do of like, well, I really need to know what's happening right now, but I know I can't ask him in this moment, right? Because he's like about to blow his top. So or he's in the middle of having 5 conversations with other people. So we have to wait till next week or whatever.
So this public nuisance lawsuit that he files and all of these other plaintiffs, sign on, eventually it gets the attention of Congress and it gets the attention of state attorneys general. And yes, as a viewer, I'm thinking, oh, that's cool. The state attorneys general, they're in on it now. So, cavalry to the rescue. Paul didn't feel that way. Explain why.
I think so. With attorney generals, it's a complicated thing because Paul, like I said, the local problems require local solutions. And he was really, from the outset of this, preaching to me and to anybody that would listen that he wanted to do this differently, and differently from one of the most famous cases of all time in America. The biggest settlement of all time is the tobacco cases from the 90s. Yep. They got $240 billion over that was supposed to be paid out over 30 years. And a lot of those settlement funds, something from what I've seen, anywhere from 90 to 95% of those went to of those funds did not go to anybody who suffered personally from lung cancer or the effects of cigarettes. So it was something that was, Paul just was like, can we have a lawsuit and get some settlement money that is actually going to go to people at a grassroots level? And attorneys general, if they take a lawsuit up and they file it on behalf of the state, oftentimes that's what happened with the tobacco litigation. It was all attorneys general. And so oftentimes they take that money and it goes into sort of like the state coffers, and however the state decides to spend that money is how it gets allocated. So it could be used for police overtime. It could be used to fill potholes. It could be used in so many different ways. And so,
yeah, and there's not necessarily nefarious intention. It's just that if you're going to give any state government, a big pot of money, they're going to find ways to spend it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I truly don't think like attorneys general are bad people. They're just like, they're working within the bounds of how they, what precedent has been set about how they do their job.
Yes. Well, AG stands for Attorney General, but Paul had another name for the acronym.
He did. One of my favorite lines. He said, AG stands for aspiring governor. And the funniest thing is that while we were making this movie over the course of those 6 years, almost every aspiring governor, attorney general that Paul was dealing with became a governor years later. So
Wow. Okay.
the DeWine in Ohio, I'm blanking on the name of the lady in Massachusetts.
Healy?
Maura
Healy.
Healy. Yep.
Yes.
And Stein in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And Shapiro in Pennsylvania. And Paul was dealing with all of those folks all the time, and they all went on to be governor.
So the film has such a classic, as you mentioned earlier, kind of a David versus Goliath, figure, and Paul cuts that figure because he's not slick. He's probably the least slick of the attorneys on his team, just in terms of from a fashion standpoint and how he presents himself, and you can really see him taking on the toll as your film goes on. How it's really worn him down. He makes references to his law practice really suffers because of it. This requires an awful lot of not just time, but it has to be funded, also. So he's a very compelling character from that standpoint. Tell me about what kind of exposure to and interaction with the folks who were not just defending the defendants in this point, which are, and who are the defendant companies?
So the defendant companies, they're called the big three. The biggest three distributors in our country are all in the top 15 of the Fortune 500.
Yeah.
And I think collectively, these numbers are from 2018, but collectively back in 2018, they made $500 billion a year. Mm-hmm. Now, not all of that is due to opioid sales and distribution, right, but they're huge companies. It's Cardinal Health, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen.
Okay.
And so they ship everything from OxyContin to Robitussin.
Yes.
But they're the main source of how we get our medical goods in this country.
And aside from having access to the deposition footage that's in your film, was there any time that either you approached or they approached you and said, "Hey, I'm the VP of strategy here at McKesson. Here's my side of it"?
No, we did approach them, and they did not want to participate in the film, which is to be expected. But yeah, it really.
Well, you say it's to be expected, and I think that's why. Why is that to be expected?
I mean, my experience with any sort of corporate executives throughout my life is to obfuscate and obscure and not have to be really that truthful. This is just my own personal opinion. I mean, I think I've interviewed a couple CEOs in my time, and I feel like they're paid a lot of money to speak words and say next to nothing.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
and this is obviously, this is rhetorical and theoretical, but if there was a documentary to be made wherein the C-suite folks, as they're called, at these pharmaceutical companies were going to be able to say, you people have it all wrong. It's all about the personal failings of the addict. You've blamed us for supplying them with a highly addictive drug, but it's really all about them, and we are not just rich beyond all means, but our personal virtue is what this film should all be about. I've never seen a documentary that takes that perspective, and I feel like if that perspective were possible, it would be out there.
I agree with you. I would love to have that conversation with somebody from a C-suite in these corporations.
I would even like to be in an audience. And you know how, I don't know if they do them anymore, but they used to have these things called Q ratings where they would have audiences watch a film and you'd have this little meter, right? So if you have an audience of 100 people, just statistically speaking, there's got to be one or two guys in there, and every time the corporate mouthpiece comes on and, talks about the billions that they're making from this drug, they're just dialing that up to, the big thumbs up, like that's the team I want to be on.
I mean, I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. I would, it's just the culture that we live in, Michael. I feel like people I would love to have that sense of honesty and vulnerability, and accountability from people who are at that level. But there's just, I think that again, my perspective is from where I sit, there's so much at stake with everything that they say. And so they function out of a place of liability rather than honesty.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I go on one social justice rant per interview, so that's over. Now we can move on. I don't want to give away how your film ends. I just want to reference how it ends in asking you this: does the manner in which the film ends, the way that the legal verdict is arrived at, how, from your perspective as a filmmaker, did it change your desire to have this story out in the world? Did that feel like the most relevant thing, or did the verdict just sort of feel like part of the vessel that you were most interested in bringing forward?
I mean, it didn't change the reasons of why. I really wanted the film to come out for so many reasons, but it changed. Like, when the verdict came out, I had to go back and re-edit the film quite a bit in order to sort of like reverse engineer and build to that climax in a different way. And so this often happens when making a documentary, is you don't know how things are going to turn out, and you sort of have to be listening the whole time, and you think that the film is about one thing, but by the time you get to the end, it's about another thing. Right. And that's actually why I love making docs, because it really is like, I think it's an old Frederick Wiseman quote of like, if you're not listening, then you're not making a good movie, or something like that. Like, if you start out making the same movie that you thought you would from the beginning, you weren't listening. So sure. It really is one of my favorite parts, to look back and be like, oh wow, I made a movie about what's the nature of justice in America look like, and what personal sacrifices does like it take for one man to make a difference. I thought like there was part of that in my original intention, but not really the sort of like overall, what does it feel like to go through a really high stakes sort of legal situation in America. And so it just shifted what I felt like the story was about. And I needed to, once the ending happened, I needed to go back and sort of build to the film, to the climax in a different way.
And I think that the one thing that can be said, regardless of what the outcome of the film may or may not be, which we're not going to refer to right now, is you found a hero, a guy that spoke truth to power, that put a lot at risk, but somebody that didn't seem to go into the endeavor thinking, I'm going to be a hero.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so my original intention with this was a big reference point was Michael Clayton. Sure. I love that movie.
Yeah, I've only seen it about 15 times.
Yeah. I mean, Michael, there's a version of this movie we had for a long time where the last shot in the film is just Paul driving with all the credits playing over him.
That's very Michael Clayton.
It was very on the nose, very on the nose. And then I started, I watched The Verdict, and when the pandemic hit, I just started watching a bunch of like older like 70s movies too. I like watched like The Parallax View and Thief and Sorcerer, and I was like, there's something in this mix of like
anti-heroes.
And so I like that. I like showing the very well-rounded sort of like these not even an anti-hero, but like showing the flaws of our heroes, I think is important.
Right.
So that was sort of these reference points for me as I was going through and making the film over many, many years, and just trying to collect those thoughts in my head and those references to be like, how can I use those as inspiration for this film?
So when did you wrap production on The Bitter Pill?
It was 2020, July of 2022, I think.
Okay.
And so it was, is that right? Yeah. Like five 5 years, and then I needed another 6 months or so of editing on top of that, and that made it about a six and a half year journey, and then getting the movie out into the world took another year or so.
Yeah, and I think, as I mentioned when we first started talking, you and I are speaking on the 23rd of September. You had your PBS national broadcast premiere last night. Congratulations on that. The documentary will be available to stream until December the 10th of 2025 on PBS Passport, by way of the PBS app, or on the PBS YouTube channel. So plenty of places and opportunities for folks to see this. Super compelling, super worthwhile film to check out. Clay Tweel, thank you for your time. I've appreciated speaking with you.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks for watching the film and spreading the word.
Totally my pleasure.
Make drugs get money, 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 make